I'm J. Elizabeth Clark, Professor of English at LaGuardia Community College, and today it is my utter delight to welcome Pablo Avila, who is our Associate Director for the Center for Teaching and Learning, for a conversation about high-impact practices at LaGuardia. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It is a delight to have this conversation. And we're going to, I think, head down memory lane a little bit.
Yes, we will.
So let's just jump right in. So unlike anybody else at the college, you sit in a very unique perspective of being able to talk about your experiences as a student, as a staff member, and also as a faculty member. So tell us a little bit about your personal journey with HIPS.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I focus on ePortfolios because that's the one that I probably have been exposed to the most. And it's funny because I was thinking earlier today about the different roles and the different people that I have worked with in terms of my work with ePortfolios. First, I started as a student. So I remember walking into the C building on the second floor, being confused about where to go. This was in the spring of 2007. Spring 2007. So I started as a brand new student at LaGuardia. I didn't know much about it. I had just arrived in New York, and I remember being very nervous and even taking classes with a lot of students. And it wasn't until my ANG 101 course where I was introduced to this thing called ePortfolio, and I wasn't sure exactly what it was. And thinking back to my experience, I think I had my idea of college, I come from Peru, was sort of like a banking model, right? It's transmission of knowledge. You go to college, you attend class, you gain knowledge, and then you take a test and you demonstrate that you've learned, and then you earn a degree. But when ePortfolios were introduced to me and this idea of think about your learning or tell me about yourself or what's the best work that you want to showcase, that kind of felt weird and distant to me, but it quickly sort of like made sense because it made me think about what I was learning at that moment and how what I was learning in one course was helping me learn in another course. Yeah. So if you recall, I was taking a cluster. I don't know if clusters still exist.
It was a form of a learning community.
It's a form of a learning community. So it was ENG 101, 103, Introduction to Sociology and Social Movements. And it was so evident, all of the connections that I was making between classes, that when writing about it on the portfolio, even though it was very weird to write about myself because I didn't know what to write about it, it really made sense that I began to document what I was learning. And over time, I remember building different iterations of my portfolio. And I remember being part of the ePortfolio Scholars where I was adding work. And then suddenly I was thinking, I really was taking really interesting courses, but maybe there's this one that I want to showcase more than I want to showcase others. And I realized that I was making those decisions little by little without having the knowledge or the language for saying, I'm selecting the best work because I want people to see what I'm capable of. And I began not only building this portfolio, but thinking about who would see it. So at the beginning, it was a student, but then, or an instructor, but then it would be someone else, someone outside the college who would be interested in learning about this student at LaGuardia, or a prospective employer when I was doing my internship. So over my time then, when I transitioned to the ePortfolio team and me helping other students, I quickly began to see the benefits of portfolios in my own experience. And as I told the story and as I share my experience with other students, I realized that them hearing from another student, it resonated in a different way than them hearing it about it from a faculty member. And then in the center, after being part of the ePortfolio team, I started working, with the first year seminar faculty, and then also working with mentors and using the same knowledge, but I guess tailoring it in a different way. So this time I wasn't working only with students. I was working with mentors. And we were explicit about introducing ePortfolio at the beginning because we thought this thing could help them understand their major. This thing could help them understand how to manage their time. And not the it itself, but the ePortfolio being a place where they would reflect about it. And then little by little, I began having more experience working with faculty and really seeing the other side of the practice, right? So it's not only the ePortfolio, a website that you build where you add documents, like you add a file to, a file cabinet, but really thinking strategically about, a specific assignment and how do you integrate reflection in an assignment that students complete in their portfolios. So fast forward a number of years, and when I started teaching EDF 101, the first year seminar for education, I realized that it was a sort of like a full circle moment, right? When many years ago I was there as a student, but now I was as an instructor, and I was thinking about how can I help students, develop those digital skills. So in EDF, we also emphasize digital communication and responsible digital citizenship, right? And portfolios are an example of that, how students develop these digital tools that they can carry with themselves. And also the technology back in 2007, it's way different than it is now.
Yeah, it looks so much different. Yeah.
I remember building portfolios in Netscape Composer.
Yep.
Like who remembers that? But now mobile accessibility, it's different. So having been through those experiences, again, focusing on ePortfolio, but being a student, being a staff member, working alongside faculty outside of the classroom, because then I quickly realized, oh, gee, a lot of faculty actually go to faculty professional development. I thought they were teaching all the time. So being part of that allowed me to use my experience as a student and think about how I can support, students, mentors, faculty, use the technology, but also use the ePortfolio practice to advance student learning. And, I think that can be across different disciplines, whether you're working with a mathematician or a philosopher, right? In my experience, I've been able to work with faculty, across different disciplines in helping them adapt this practice into their teaching.
I have to say, it's been really something to watch your evolution over time. I mean, I remember your first portfolio.
Yes.
And then as you moved towards psychology,
yes.
And then you moved towards photography, and there was a period where you were really emphasizing photography in your portfolio.
Yes.
And now education,
yes.
and then also thinking about your role as a faculty member. It's really been such a privilege to watch you move through those different phases, but also understand how you were developing metacognitively, right? Thinking about what you were learning. And I think now, as a faculty member, you're really employing that in your own classes. And it's, like you said, it's a full circle moment that's really neat.
And when I talk about my own educational journey, I wanted to do a PhD in social psychology. I don't know why, but I was really interested in doing that. But at one point I realized that wasn't going to be my trajectory. And I quickly, when I got this job at the center in 2010, I realized that I was more curious to learn about education and really what happened behind the scenes of the teaching practice. So I mentioned that I thought faculty will always be, teaching all the time. I actually didn't know that there were adjunct faculty. And I realized, wait a minute, there's full-time faculty, there's faculty that are doing research, there's this. And I quickly realized that I was more curious to learn about that. And also because I realized that ePortfolio wasn't only that website, it was a practice. And when I started talking to faculty and learning about it and developing assignments, and I'm like, what do you mean develop an assignment? And little by little, I realized that there was a whole entire world behind everything that faculty prepared for outside of the class. Right. And that's when I realized that, okay, a PhD in social psychology was a dream at one point. But now that I'm doing my doctorate in higher ed, I realized that I somehow ended up in the right place. But to your point, the portfolios allow me to see all of that evolution. I don't think if I didn't have all of those iterations of those portfolios, I wouldn't have been able to see very distinctively, as you described, all of my interests manifesting themselves at periods of time. I was into photography for quite a good amount of time, but then after
and your
that,
photographs were beautiful. I mean, and that was a beautiful portfolio. Like it was really lovely, but that wasn't where you were really headed professionally. But it gave you the opportunity to really showcase that work and think about it. All right, so now you're using portfolios to teach students. So what does it look like when you are using ePortfolio to teach your education students? What does that HIP look like for you on the ground?
So I didn't take this course that I'm teaching now. I took a very different iteration of that course many years ago. And I thought that the use of portfolios in the course that I teach would be something that I am very deeply familiar with. I was right, but at the same time I was not. I was right because I know how the technology works. I know the typical challenges students may have about building a portfolio, but I wasn't too acquainted with the use of the practice and specifically reflection in EDF 101 and how students use portfolios to manifest that. So in education majors have to complete different certifications at one point in their career, normally at a four-year college. And part of many of those certifications is a reflection of their own teaching. And we actually use intentionally those reflections in the portfolio to help students get into the habit of, it's not only about checking boxes, it's about thinking about how is this particular, say, certification is going to help you work with a specific student population. Yeah. And also our course has an emphasis on the field, an introduction to the field of education through the lens of social justice. So we do a number of assignments where students are reflecting about historical events in the field of education through the lens of social justice, and they use the portfolio to build digital essays. So for instance, one of them is the school narrative, where we ask students, what is one memorable experience that motivated you to become a teacher? And it's such a deeply emotional and personal experience because students think about their favorite teacher, or maybe a crisis in high school that a counselor helped them with, or maybe a very difficult moment where a tutor really stepped in and made a difference. So, and students pour their hearts into these pages in the portfolios, and they actually build these portfolios that are full of a narrative and sort of like their educational histories. So it's not necessarily about building the menu for, the courses that I'm taking this semester, or building, I don't know, any other random page of my connections. I remember we used to have a page on the portfolio. It's really about documenting their histories of who they want to become. And that is the emphasis on reflection that we try to do, emphasize to students, to tell them, this is eventually what you're going to be doing in certifications for reflecting about your own teaching, who you are as a future educator. So the use of the portfolio, at least in the EDF 101, follows, a very reflective infused practice. And I think faculty, especially the program director in the education program, has done a great job at mapping the assignments across different courses. So the school narrative and the dream deferred, it's another assignment, really is the first stepping stone for the philosophy, my teaching philosophy, that students complete in another course. So it's all like a built-in block. And I think that's the part that I was new to, even though I know how the system works and I can help students how to fix this or that. But it was really the documentation of that learning over time that I was really sort of like new to, but that I have over time, helped students develop.
Absolutely. And I mean, for me, I'm always interested in that reflective piece. Like I think that's the magic that makes portfolios.
Yeah.
And over again in these case studies, people have talked about not just reflection, but the importance of having time and space, right? That a lot of times in the curriculum, there's not a place for that. So having dedicated time and space in ePortfolio to ask students to reflect becomes important in the moment, and then also later when they look back.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it goes back to the idea. So I had a very different idea of college in Peru, because I thought it was like a banking model. So you go to college, you attain all of this knowledge, and then you take a test, you get a good grade, and then you pass. But in many ways, I think the system can be so transactional that you take course and course and course, you check them off, but there's no time to think about how the learning of one course is helping you with becoming this, full professional, whether you're an accountant or a nurse or, an English major or a journalist, right? There really isn't space for students to do that. And I see myself there, because when I was introduced to portfolios, I'm like, what do you mean think about myself? What am I supposed to write about? Right. Who cares to listen to my story? But it's in that point where I think portfolios can make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. Like the articulation of who you are, who you're becoming, where you've been.
Yeah.
So how do you find that students have reacted to this? So what is their response to you as you're in the classroom with them?
I think first of all, students always see the portfolio as an assignment they need to complete.
Of course.
Right? I start the semester and I show them always at least one or two portfolios from a previous class where I tell them these are two great portfolios, two great examples of what students have done. And I do that at the beginning. I was very excited to do that, but then I take it with a grain of salt because sometimes things, wait a minute, do I need to do that? Like, it becomes overwhelming, right? So I do tell them these are two great examples. We're going to get you there. There's going to be a mentor who's going to be helping you. So students always react with, certain level of caution because of the technology. I don't have a laptop for this, or how can I do this on my phone? What if I don't have pictures? Why can I? So it's always about the technical aspect. But I think the mentor and the support structure is solid, that students get that support. I think it is the moment when students begin to think about their own journeys as education majors, or the reflective pieces, the assignments, where they quickly begin to grasp the idea of having this portfolio. And then there's a moment, at LaGuardia, we speak about learning portfolios or showcase portfolios. The learning portfolio is where the student begins to identify skills that they may have if they want to be an education major. They learned about potential careers, right? The audience may be the instructor, maybe another classmate. But once they begin to turn that into a showcase portfolio, that's when they really begin to think about, who's the audience? Maybe I want to share this with an outside, prospective manager who may hire me for an internship, right? And it is then when students begin to think about portfolios, not necessarily as a tool, but as a process for them to document their learning, but also showcase what they are capable of. So at the EDF, which is a very beginning course, students always think about the ePortfolio as a tool, right? And they only think about that. But then once I begin to explain, this is a portfolio that you're going to use, for your time at LaGuardia. In your foundations course, you're going to add another. This other section, you're not going to do it in this course. You're going to do it in the next. That's when students begin to see how portable, if you will, the portfolio is. And they begin to see it as a whole thing rather than just a, mere assignment in my course.
Right. And the connections from EDF to foundations, from course to course, the idea that what's happening in this class is connected to this other class, is connected to this other class.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think part of that is also the work on faculty on making those intentional touch points, right? So in the EDF, Pablo, you're going to focus on this and that. In the foundations, you're going to focus on that and that. And so that way students see, oh, wait, yeah, I actually have a portfolio. I used it in my EDF. Yeah. And you know what? I want to change it, right? And I think that's the point when students begin to see that they can customize their portfolios. Back in the days, Netscape Composer was but now students can actually customize and add. And that's when I quickly realized that students are beginning to get it. And they really make a reflection of their own self. And students upload images with their favorite colors. And they upload pictures of their families. And obviously, knowing within the parameters of what they can share publicly, they are comfortable with tailoring and crafting this piece that it's a total representation of who they are.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so as we wrap up, what do you think LaGuardia could do to better support scaling HIPS across the college?
Well, I think faculty are at the center of teaching and learning, obviously. Obviously, faculty professional development, I think, continues to be a critical aspect of the work of the college for supporting students. Most of the times when I hear people talk about this resource for students and that, I always think about faculty, probably because I have worked with them for a long time. But at the same time is also supporting faculty in understanding, in this case, ePortfolio as a practice, not necessarily understanding how to use the system, right? Or how to build a simple portfolio or how to upload a PDF into a portfolio, but really understanding the nuances of ePortfolio practice and how we help students, going back to your point, right? It's not a matter of uploading all of your work, but helping students think about how the learning of one course happens supports the learning of another course, but also how students are building, skills over time that they can use the portfolios to document. And I think that in and itself is the practice that I think we can always do more to support, in this case, the work of HIPS, the work of the portfolio, but also faculty. And the other thing is thinking about really things that happen globally, right? So the career readiness, I always think about it, especially recently. there's a big push for community college students, for college students really, to be career ready, right? And they're having a lot of conversations about what's the point of a college degree. You can always go to YouTube and learn about this, or a MOOC, right? But I think students need to have a good, solid understanding of the subject matter, but also they need to be developing skills that will help them in the workforce. And I think portfolios are well positioned for that. Because today, as opposed to in 2007, when it was very different, students are able to communicate who they are beyond a resume. Having a LinkedIn profile, having a portfolio, a website that documents everything that they're able to do with multimodal elements like a video, a document, a reflection that really gives the holistic picture of who the student are. I think that's a way to scale up efforts like what we have been doing with portfolios.
Wonderful. I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and talking about your journey with HIPS and how you see HIPS playing out in the landscape of the college. Thank you so much.
Thank you.